Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you.
Hey, welcome back to In a Nutshell. This is Bill Brush, and today's topic is going to be something you probably don't think about a lot, but happens in a lot of situations in different ways, and that's fast-growing crop. How do you handle them? How do you make the best of that crop? And a lot of it's just understanding what to do and how to do it and when to do it. So we start with, and what do you think of a fast-growing crop? You know, I'm going to tell you the one that I worked with was most responsive to my treatments, but also one I was just amazed at how fast it actually grows. You know, and that is, you think of a red radish. You know, you see them a lot in salads, trays, but they are so rapidly growing. It's amazing to me. I didn't realize that until I got called out on a problem with one of my growers. They said, "Can you come over and look at these?" So we went over and looked at these radishes. Now, if you're familiar with a radish, the way that they want them, because they were slicing them and they want them all the perfect size, and then they put them through a machine and sliced them up to the exact same type of slice so they could put it into salad mixes that we see in the store all these days. And so the problem with these was the inside was soft, wasn't firm. It was the term they use a lot is pithy. It doesn't have that good, strong consistency. So to me, immediately, I knew in my mind that they were short of potassium, because potassium is the key to cell wall strength, and that's what you weren't getting in the center. And they're growing out, and they just don't have enough potassium to firm that up. But again, the radish doesn't much care. It'll still reproduce. It'll be fine. And so, but a tiny, and I'm telling you, you can't believe how tiny a radish seed is. It's just a little speck, okay? And it'll grow a big radish, probably 2 inches tall and about 1.5 to 2 inches wide. Beautiful color, big top on it in about 19 days. 19 days, that is fast, because seed's got to germinate. It's got to stick out a plumule to the, which is the little shoot growing to the surface. It's got to put a root down at the bottom. And then after it's grown for a while, it's got to bulk up that big root, which is what we want, that radish, for our own consumption. So in 19 days, this all happened. One, irrigation has to be spot on, because if it ever gets dried out, it just won't, it'll stop growing really, really quickly. So, but they were doing a good job on that. So I asked them about the potassium, because that's the first thing I thought might be the culprit here. And they said, "Oh, we put plenty of potassium on," and told me the number of units. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, when did you put it on?" "Oh, we got them up and growing, and they were out of the ground, and they were probably 1.5 inches to, high out on, the green part growing out of the surface of the soil." And I said, "Well, there's your problem." They looked at me funny, and I said, "Well, what's that?" For this fast a growing crop, once I found out how fast they grew, I said, you cannot get the fertilizer on if you don't put it on before the plant's ever put in the ground. That seed, before it's ever put in the ground, you have to have all your fertilizer in place for the entire 19 days. Because anything you plant has a delay factor. Most of the time, what you'll find is when you put a nutrient onto the soil, the first thing that happens to it is the microbial population will get it first. Dr. Albrecht talked about the nutrients and always said, the exact phrase he liked to use a lot was, the microbes eat at the first table. And microbes are tremendous mineralizers. They'll get that, use it for their own function, and then as they die, it's going to be really available for the next one, which is more likely where the radish will come into it and get it. And so, but there's a delay. So if I wait 7 to 10 days and then apply it, and this has to happen first, by the time I'm actually putting potassium, this radish has grown to the size it's going to be, and it's just sitting there to mature a little bit. It's a little darker red. And guess what? You didn't get the potassium, and the inside is pithy. It doesn't have enough potassium to give you that good, strong cell wall strength that you need to have that nice crisp. And that's not just radishes. Anything that you need that big crunch of something that's very, very firm like that, it's a potassium. And so it's so quick that, again, you've got to have all your nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, sulfur, your calcium, magnesium right, and all the micros you want there day one of planting. And we did this, and it was really rewarding to me because it's exactly what it needed to do. And we had some things that were 21 days it might be to harvest, it might be 18 days, but right around 19 to 20. It was just amazing how fast that seed and how much energy it had to push that kind of growth with everything going on. So other crops, and a lot of people, you may not think of this because the crop itself is not a hugely fast grower, and that would be potatoes, regular, field potatoes. And they don't, as a plant, grow rapidly because they'll come off the root. And they'll basically push out a plum. You'll put in some roots, and they'll start to that plum will grow up, and it'll grow a nice potato, really bush-like type of crop. And then after a while, it'll put on some magnificently beautiful purple type flower, and a flowering field of potatoes is just really pretty when they're in bloom like that. The problem with that is that flower and bloom and seed does us no good. That's not what we're looking for in that plant. We're looking for the roots, and we're looking for those roots to bulk up. So once we've flowered, then what the plant will begin to do is it'll store back into those roots, and they will bulk up. So you have some time to get there, but you have to have all the what you started the season. I looked at my soil sample. I have ample amounts of potassium, to bulk these potatoes. That's good, except some will be tied up. Some will be used for the growth because there's potassium in all that growth. And so when you're at that maximum bulking point in that crop's life, you're going to be not at optimum potassium levels. So you have to plan for that, get up, and your timing, you want to get it out there about 25 to 30 days ahead of when this bulking will begin. Because again, what do we want that potato to be? We want it to be large in size. Everybody normally puts on plenty of nitrogen, so that's not the issue. The thing that they forget is that if they don't have their soil balanced with enough calcium, that'd be number two. So we fill all those cells as it's starting to bulk up. And then the last one is that cell wall strength. Nobody wants a potato that's soft in the middle and mushy and that you want something that's good and firm. Just like when you look at chopping a radish, cutting that potato in half or in quarters, and you could be putting it in and boiling it. You could put it into something like a potato salad where you like those big chunks that don't break down when you go to mix it together. It makes those big, nice, chunky parts that hold on to a lot of the good stuff that makes potato salad delicious. All of those things are all started in the ground, making sure you can bulk that up with enough nitrogen for growth, enough calcium to fill those cells, and enough potassium to give it cell walls. If not, it can be real soft and rubbery, not what you're looking for, and definitely doesn't have near the uses of these. Those become mashed potato flakes or whatever. They'll have another use of them rather than what we see as a good baked potato or things that we can use in other dishes. Another one to look at too is turnips. And I bring turnips up, not that turnip itself is so massively fast in its growth, but again, it comes back, and hopefully if you've listened to several podcasts, you'll hear what do we want the plant to do is based on what I want to harvest from that plant. So a good example is if I want to harvest the greens, is not nearly the same as harvesting the actual turnip, the bulb, the root, okay? Real similar to beets, red beets. If you have those, A lot of people will just harvest them as beet tops rather than the actual dark red beet on the bottom. Again, which part do we want? Okay, so if you're doing things like your fertility, one of the things you want to do is you want to look at what kind of nitrogen am I putting in? And as it matures, if we've been feeding it too large of a portion of ammonium, you may get some bolting. You may want to go right past finishing that plant and make seed, because that is the essence that, I talked about the potato plant. What did it want to do? It was making seed for reproduction, even though we don't ever use it for that. Most of the time with potatoes, we cut it into little pieces and then plant what we call a seed piece in the furrow where we want that potato vine to grow. And so same thing with turnips is you're looking to get the non-reproductive body. You're looking for the vegetative. So what are you looking? You need more nitrate nitrogen rather than ammonium. And so you have to think, what do I want the plant to do to get the best result? All things in terms of when you're harvesting vegetative crops, it becomes very, very important to know your planting date, because normally if you'll look on the guide, it'll tell you how many days from planting to harvest. So we'll just take an arbitrary number. It says it's 100 days. Okay. Well, you better be looking at that plant at 85 and 90 days in there to make sure that it's not getting ready to reproduce, which means we won't be able to harvest it, that vegetative portion, because it'll already turn to the reproductive phase. And what it does is it pulls sugars and starches and puts it into the growth of the seed head. Well, what that does is makes either a flat, no taste, or a bitter taste, because it's taken all the sugars. And because of that, it'll be not near what anybody wants to buy, because we're looking for cabbage or something like that, head lettuce, even things like romaine, green leaf, red leaf. These are all vegetative crops that we are harvesting for the amount of vegetative growth that we get out of them. Nobody wants the seed part because it changes the taste and texture and everything about that plant. So one of the things when you are looking at growing, they can grow fast and they can come on quickly. One day, I've looked at cabbage fields where one day they look pretty good. As little as 5 to 7 days later, they're already converting and going to form a seed head. And you can tell by just the taste in the center. It's all where the new growth has come in the center of that ball. You'll look and taste that, the oldest or the newest growing tissue, and it's bitter, and you probably missed the boat and you should have harvested already. So we look at sweetness, and where does a lot of sweetness come from? One of the nutrients that I always like to think it's one of the most overlooked is sulfur. And sulfur can add a lot of sweetness to it. If you don't think so, and if you have livestock and you have them in a pasture, go out there and use some potassium, but don't use potassium sulfate. Use potassium chloride, and it's what we call muriate of potash, a really nice form of potassium. But if you've ever had, a salt, bitter or very much astringent, so that it's not real good to the taste. And when that's what you're using for your grass or whatever your pasture is, it will give off that same flavor. And guess what? The livestock, whatever's eating it, won't be nearly as receptive to it as something that's been used sulfate in there. It's so bad that the livestock will be lined up on the edge of the pasture, have lush grass, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 inches deep, and they've got their head stuck through the gate or the fence trying to get next door into that paddock where you haven't grazed it off yet, but they use sulfate. It's a really interesting thing. They know better. And so it just gives you an idea what sulfur can do. It gives you complex carbohydrates. It is necessary in that formation, that chemistry of forming those complex carbohydrates. So it does 2 things. One, it's not a simple sugar, so it lasts longer. If you have like fruiting crops, like fruit, apples, peaches, nectarines, anything that's a real fruit that you're looking for a certain amount of sweetness to, they last longer, a longer shelf life after harvest as a function of sulfur. You're not going to get sulfur in and have all those effects in that crop unless you went earlier on that, depending on how long it takes for that crop to grow. Tree crops can take 120, 160, 180 days. You can be 6 months between flower and when you actually harvest. So one is more of a steady diet of sulfur, but making sure you concentrate as the sugar or as the flesh of that is really beginning to form. Again, you got to be ahead of it. So there's things on these fast moving crops that's important to get their nutrition right. There's some things on almost any crop that there is a certain time that we want to have everything there for us in the right amounts. There's a international organization, the International Plant Institute, and they went on a long series for a lot of times that talk about fertility. Their advertising campaign they came out was talks about the 4 R's: the right kind of fertilizer, in the right amount, in the right place, at the right time. So it's whatever product I need. Do I need nitrate? Do I need ammonium? Do I need potassium sulfate? Do I need potassium chloride? So the right product in the right amount. Just because it could be free, and if I'm putting too much, I do as much damage if I put too little most of the time. So right product, the right amount, putting it in the right place. If I have to wait for my roots, like the radish I talked about earlier, if I put that 2 or 3 inches away from where I put the seed, by the time it gets there, the game was far over. So what we have to do is we have to put it right close. So we have to use the right kind of products that won't burn that seed as it emerges. So we have to have it in, again, the right place, not too far away, but close enough where we'll get into it and utilize it to its best capabilities, and then the right time, which is kind of the emphasis I'm on my topic here today. The right time, knowing what can happen and what can happen in the soil before it's actually pulled into the plant. And so with that, I think I'll end that today. Good luck with your garden, your crops. But remember, always think like the plant and understand what it's trying to do with the nutrients you apply. And then to get the best result, once you begin to think more about what it needs and when it needs it, I think you'll be more successful. So until next time, stay curious.
Thanks for another wonderful episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure that all of our listeners very much so loved what you had to say about fast-growing crops and all of your knowledge about them. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.